Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today our analyst will be breaking down all of the relevant changes in patch 10.11. This is definitely a smaller patch than usual as the big mid-season update is right around the corner. Let's dive in and see what's being changed in 10.11. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to start it off, let's talk about galaxies. There's only one new galaxy in 10.11 and no other changes, so without further ado, let's talk about the new galaxy, Little Legends. This galaxy is meant to be the opposite to Medium Legends, as players will begin with 85 health. Visually, your Little Legend is going to be a lot smaller, but as far as the gameplay goes, this galaxy is really going to be fast-paced. Consider how often there will be a couple of players nearing 80 health just from the first 3 rounds of Stage 2. In this galaxy, if that happens, they'll now be around 65 health on 2.5. It's not impossible games will be over by the time Stage 5 comes into play. So a few tips to consider in this new galaxy is don't play greedy, especially in the early game. Try to get strong and win rounds to preserve health, as keeping yourself above 50 HP through Stage 2 and 3 will possibly be enough to earn you a top 4 in this galaxy. That wraps it up for galaxies, and with no system changes, we can jump straight into trait changes. Again, this patch is a small one, so there's only 2 traits being adjusted in 10.11. Up first, we have Chrono getting a buff to the 4 and 6 piece of the trait. The delay between each attack speed burst is being reduced to 8, 3.5, 1.5 from 8, 4, 2. Essentially, what has happened with Chrono after the rework it received in patch 10.9 is that players figured out that 2 Chrono was much better and easier to splash in compared to 4. 6 Chronos has always been more or less a joke build, so it really isn't a factor, but 4 Chrono was a staple of the meta because of Kale. But over time, as mentioned, 2 Chrono became the preferred way to use Chrono. The initial attack speed buff was way more beneficial than getting a second attack speed buff 4 seconds later. So the intent is to make 4 Chronos more appealing by shaving off 0.5 seconds on the delay between attack speed boosts. Will this be enough to make it matter? We'll have to see, but likely 2 Chrono will remain dominant over the 4-piece trait because of how easy it is to fit 2 Chrono in. 6 Chrono will likely remain for those willing to play niche builds that can occasionally do well. Infiltrators are up next, as they are receiving another change. This trait has been touched upon in several patches in a row because it's clear it's not easily balanceable. The change in this patch is that Infiltrators will now jump immediately at the start of combat. This removes the small delay that they currently have, meaning enemy champions in the backline have a greater chance of instantly turning on the Infiltrators. The implications for this change make it so Infiltrators don't get a free reign at the beginning of a fight on the enemy backline. With good positioning, it should be more viable to punish the Infiltrator player. Whether this change is too heavy-handed or not, we'll have to see as the meta develops. That's going to be it for trait changes this week. Next up, we have the meat and potatoes of this patch, champion changes. Alright, to begin, we have a few one-cost champions getting adjusted, beginning with Caitlyn. Caitlyn is having her abilities damage lowered to 2250 from 3000 at tier 3. It's a sizable nerf and will certainly make players question whether it's worth gunning for Caitlyn 3 anymore. She was generally only 3-starred in the Shredder composition, and with a nearly 800 damage reduction, it may no longer be worthwhile to aim for Caitlyn 3 in any build, Shredder included. That said, Caitlyn 2 still packs a decent punch, and the jump in damage from 2 to 3 stars is still quite large. But it's not as likely that she'll now guarantee a one-shot to basically any champion in the game when 3-starred, and that only lowers Caitlyn 3's value. Certainly she's still playable, but maybe consider not upgrading her past 2 when playing reroll builds in 10.11. Next up is Graves. Graves has easily been one of the best one-cost champions of set 3 for quite some time now because of the utility his ability provides at any stage of the game. Sure, Xayah is a better carry, and Kha'Zix has an ultimate that instantly kills a lot of solo targets, but Graves has a 4-second blind, even just at level 2. So finally, he's getting whacked by the nerf bat, and his blind duration will now be slightly more reasonable as it's going down to 2-3-5 from 3-4-5. Never fear though, as Graves will still be useful with a 3-second blind when 2-starred. May even open up the possibility of players wanting to reroll for Graves 3 to get that juicy looking 5-second blind. More than likely what will happen is Graves will now keep his influence mostly to the early and the beginning of the mid game and fall off later on. All in all, it's a good change to help even out his ability strength. Continuing down the one-cost champion list, next up is Jarvan. Jarvan is having his attack speed buff changed to 65, 75, 85% from 50, 75, 100%. Basically, this is meant to redistribute power from his tier 3 down to his tier 1, as 100% attack speed buff that's also AoE is just a bit too strong. Now you'll be able to play a 1-star Jarvan and get a decent buff with it being 65%. In reality though, this is just a straight up nerf. 1-cost champions rely heavily on being 2-starred to be of value, and these changes don't alter that at all. All it does is make rerolling for Jarvan 3 less appealing, which is roughly the theme of all the 1-cost champion adjustments in 10.11. It's similar to Caitlyn in that the 2-star Jarvan is still going to be good and worth playing, but there's certainly less appeal in rerolling to hit Jarvan 3. We continue the theme of reroll champions getting nerfed, as up next we have Kha'Zix. His spell damage is getting reduced to 200, 275, 400 from 200, 275, 500. A 100 damage nerf at tier 3 is quite sizable, though it is worth keeping in mind that isolation damage plus making it true damage with Void is still going to keep this ability threatening. What this change mostly does is reduce how effective Kha'Zix 3 will be in the mid game, making it slightly more difficult for the Void Brawler players to safely econ up so they can get a Vel'Koz 2 and a Cho'Gath. It is certainly possible that the damage nerf is enough to make Kha'Zix 3 way less scary to play against and make him, along with Void Brawler, more manageable. But it's also likely that this wasn't enough of a nerf, considering his auto attacks with true damage are still going to do a lot of work, and isolation will keep his ultimate relevant even with 100 less damage. And the last of the 1-cost champions being changed is Xayah. Surely this nerf comes at no surprise to anyone, as Shredder has been tearing up the meta for the past few patches. Unlike the other 1-cost champions, she isn't being targeted in her abilities' effectiveness, they are instead increasing her mana pool to 70 from 50. While you may see that and think, what about her ultimate being too strong, or maybe she does too much damage, let's first consider what an extra 20 mana means for her. By increasing her mana pool, it's increasing the ramp up time for Xayah to pop off in a team fight. Basically, she'll take just a little bit longer to cast her first ultimate, so that means she doesn't immediately hit her power spike from the 150 attack speed stim her ability provides at tier 3. On top of that, the subsequent cast will take longer as well, so there's more of a lull between the first and second cast where she isn't as effective as she'd normally be. Will this be enough to weaken the Shredder build? Considering Xayah, Caitlyn, and Jarvan all got nerfed, it's not out of the realm of possibility that this build falls off heavily. Hopefully these changes make Xayah 2 as an item holder and an early mid-game carry more appealing, and her hyper roll build style of play becomes more situational and less meta-defining. Time to move on to the rest of the champion changes, with Blitzcrank up for the first of the 2-cost champions. Blitzcrank is losing a bit of power in a spell, as the damage is going from 250, 400, 900 to 200, 350, 850. Overall, it's an odd nerf to a champion that isn't really a problem, even if brawlers are doing quite well in the meta. But if he really must be nerfed, there isn't really a way to nerf him without fundamentally altering how his ability works, so taking away just a bit of his spell power seems fair. It's more or less a change that does nothing, as Blitzcrank is used for his traits and CC and not his damage. Moving along, we've got Lucian. Lucian is getting a 50 damage buff to his ability at level 3, as it's going from 325 spell power to 375. It's a decent buff for him, but no one's really been seeking to 3-star him, mostly because there's no builds that fit in rerolling for Lucian. Basically, this makes it so that if you happen to hit Lucian 3, he's overall better than before, which is a good thing. Will it harken a new era of reroll compositions that focus on Lucian and maybe Graves? Probably not, but there's certainly always that possibility. Master Yi is the only 3-cost champion receiving changes in this patch, with his attack speed getting a minor buff. He's going up to 0.85 from 0.8, which is good in the sense that the attack speed scales better when the base attack speed is high. Is it enough to bring him to the forefront of the meta? Probably not, but it does help him overall become more useful if you give him more items. There's no 5-cost champion changes this week, so we're going to round out the balance changes with Cho'Gath and Kayle. Cho'Gath is getting some love from this patch, as his starting mana is going up to 75 from 50. This will help him cast earlier in a fight so that he may get some actual value from his ultimate. So far in set 3, he's been a bit lackluster, so it's definitely a welcome buff. It is a bit scary buffing a Void unit considering how strong Void Brawler has been in the previous patch, but Cho'Gath getting a small quality of life buff is unlikely to make the build any better than it already was. And as mentioned, we have an adjustment to Kayle. Her mana is being increased to 70 from 60, which overall makes it so she'll need a couple more auto attacks before casting her ability. It's a healthy change that slows down Kayle just a little bit in a team fight while keeping everything else about her the same. There's not likely to be too many repercussions from the mana pool increase, as Kale will remain one of the strongest carries. It does raise the question of whether or not it'll be worth making a tier item on her just to make up for the mana change. Perhaps Hand of Justice or Static Shiv will see more play on her in 10-11. Alright, before we're done with today's video, we have one last balance change to go over, which pertains to one specific item, Last Whisper. Last Whisper was a meta-defining item in 10.9, but it fell off a bit in 10.10, so seeing it nerfed is a bit concerning. The nerf makes it so the armor reduction is now 75% instead of 90%. Despite this likely not being necessary, it is overall a healthy change for the item and makes balancing it easier, as a 90% armor reduction was likely too high. All in all, it's a good change for the future of the item. That's going to be it for today's patch rundown video, folks. As this was a smaller patch, don't expect the meta to change drastically, as the big changes are coming in patch 10.12. Let us know in the comment section below what your favorite change was in this patch and what you're looking forward to in 10.12. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.